Thank you all for being here. Today was a very full day filled with emotions. It's the first day of the Reflection Hub, so we have lots of things to share and all these things going on, trying to set up, and we are very aware this is the first time a few of us go live, so don't worry, this is just a conversation, and we have other like-minded people watching us from other places in the world that they just want to hear from us and share their experiences also. So thank you all for being also on the chat. Please, if you have any questions, you can post there. We have also volunteers helping us today. And if you want to find any informations or know more about the event, you feel free to ask us there. And now we have this amazing conversation going from Canada to Brazil and the way back with 3 awesome speakers that will share with us their experiences with homelessness. So this is not an obvious topic when we talk about climate change, but homelessness is a challenge that we face that is also related to climate and extreme events in climate. Also, we have migration and inequality and all poverty challenges, food distribution. So we can relate that with many topics on climate. And that's why we are also here today to highlight these other aspects of climate change that are not so obvious usually. And yeah, so we have here with us Andrew from Homes First and also from Parkadale Free School. Andrew is based in Toronto and will share with us his knowledge about homelessness in his context. And we also have Flávia and Henrique, 2 biologists and 2 also teachers that are also in the Dente-de-Leão NGO based in Brasília, the capital of Brazil. They will also share with us their experiences in this city. And I'll first hand the floor to Andrew so he can start sharing with us. So please, Andrew.
All right, good to see everyone. Yeah, my name's Andrew, he, him. I work for Homes First Society, which is based in Toronto, Canada. A bit about the organization. Homes First provides both emergency shelter and permanent supportive housing throughout different sites in the city of Toronto. In our supportive housing sites, we house over 400 people, and in our 10 different shelters, we house almost 4,000 different people a year. Since COVID, the city has actually been renting out a lot of hotel spaces for housing people safely during the pandemic. And we've been tasked with actually running 3 of those hotel shelter sites. So that's some of our shelters as well. The organization uses, in its name, it kind of implies the housing first approach. So the idea is that by housing people first, you're really improving the lives of those with mental health and addictions challenges that might otherwise have challenges getting housed. The idea is it also makes better use of funds, that it's more efficient. And when we're talking about a housing first approach, it's really a multi-sector approach. So it combines housing, but it also involves health and social support services, because otherwise housing itself will not be successful. So in thinking about, I was thinking about the idea of giving a context for homelessness in Toronto. So the big kind of factors that I try to think about were, first, neoliberal capitalism. So in the history of the city, since the 1980s and 1990s, there's been a massive divestment in supportive housing, in housing in general, by our federal and provincial governments. This has led to a lot of downloading of costs onto cities and generally just surrendering the idea of housing as a social right. And we're just seeing that over and over and over again through the years, a major lack of housing options for people, which leads to homelessness and leads to housing precarity as well. The second and definitely related is gentrification. So starting in the 1980s and 90s as well, you're seeing a massive influx of capital into the cities of Canada. Toronto is no exception. So before, it used to be that the downtown core was relatively affordable. And in the last few decades, that's totally changed. And we're now actually seeing massive evictions, displacement of working class people. And actually, there's been some good research about how there's a definite racial component to this as well, where the downtown core is becoming whiter, more affluent, and racialized people of the city are getting displaced to lesser served, farther away areas of the city that are less integrated. It's environmental racism, and it's a colonial relationship of space in the city. A third big context, of course, is COVID. So since COVID has happened, there's obviously been massive unemployment that's happened. There's been actually another wave of massive evictions as people can't pay rent. That's definitely played into it. In terms of the homelessness crisis, historically in Toronto, because of extreme weather, being Canada, there's been a lot more of seasonal shelter use, typically during the winter. And that both means that more people use shelters, but it also means more policing of public spaces to prevent people from taking up public space. And we're seeing that with encampments throughout the city. As people who are precariously housed or newly homeless or just don't want to be in shelters are finding out, shelters have had a lot of outbreaks. They're not generally safe for certain people. And rather than try to risk that during COVID, there's been a lot of different encampments throughout the city, usually in public parks, but also in large escarpments throughout the city. And they've been met with police violence at different points. There's been really amazing solidarity that's gone on. Actually, a whole network called the Encampment Solidarity Network has risen to really try to fight those evictions and try to show up when evictions are planned. But that's definitely really exploded since COVID. And the last thing I'd say, just in terms of a context, is politically, there has been a real shift, definitely since the 1980s and 90s, towards embracing a harm reduction approach at the city level. So that's really meant that more and more, it started with actually the HIV crisis, where there was a real need to actually safeguard clean needle use. And that was the first kind of way of combating the war on drugs approach to homeless people using drugs. Typically, that's who gets criminalized for that drug use. Since that time, there's been a lot of strides at the city level to make drug use something that's not just tolerated, but there's space made for that. There's equipment on a lot of our sites for harm reduction approaches to drug use. And in general, the city itself has really embraced that kind of model. At the federal government, it's a totally different story. They're still very much committed to a war on drugs official policy, while most of the cities throughout Canada, especially Vancouver, kind of leads the way in terms of taking on a harm reduction approach. More recently, the George Floyd protests have really allowed for a massive shift, obviously in terms of the racial politics of policing in Toronto, but just policing more generally. There's really been an opening to actually start talking about alternatives to policing in terms of restorative justice, but also in terms of what kind of services are actually needed to prevent 911 calls on people that might just be having mental health challenges or just having distress in public spaces. And actually, it's amazing. The city is literally funding an alternative to 911 where service providers can take calls, actually go out, meet crises, and talk to people who are encountering them, and really offer this totally other model, right, that gets away from policing. So I think you can definitely tie that into the shifts that are coming out of George Floyd in that that whole political struggle. So I said a lot. I feel like I don't know how much time I have left, but I can definitely answer any questions to any of that in the Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew, for this all this information. It's very hard to sum up a complex subject as homelessness in a few minutes. So thank you all for accepting this challenge. And I think it's interesting to know the profile of people and how the situation is in the cities, because we have very different context here. So I'll hand it over to Flávia to talk a little bit about the work in Brazil, so we can also start seeing and highlighting these differences.
Thank you. This is so hard because I already have so many comments to make about everything that you said. It's crazy that Brazil and Canada, they're so different. They have so different approaches, and still there's so many similarities that I didn't know until we talked about this. But I'm gonna talk about the nonprofit before. So I'm Flávia. I work for the NGO called Dente-de-Leão. In English, it's the Dente-de-Leão. It's that little flower, that white flower that when you blow, the white things that I don't know the name, they are seeds, and they, wherever they fly to, they will become a new flower. So we named our NGO after this because we truly believe that after anyone comes in contact with our NGO and our projects, you become a multiplier of good actions, and you start to understand different things, and you start to try to make other people see these things. It's better if I explain the history of how we started. So 6 years ago, we started with a project called Street Store. It's an open source project from Africa, where you basically leave something that you don't want, and someone that needs it can take it for them. And we did this, but we don't have any limits, this group of friends that started this project here. So we didn't just put out some things. We created a huge event with music and shows and circus and food, a lot of food. And we made like we built some tents, and we made like a store where homeless people could go. We picked them up with buses, and they could go inside the store and buy things for free, of course, that they like it. And in the end of the event, we were like, oh, it's nice. Did you like the things that you get? And they were like, yes, of course I like. But we started to understand that they were extremely happy, not because of the concrete things that we gave them. It's not because of the food that we gave them. It's because of the visibility that we gave them. It's because of the dignity that they recovered. Because we don't think about this on our daily life, but you have the choice to pick up what you are gonna wear, and this says something about you. And these people, they don't have this anymore. So when you donate a t-shirt, you choose the t-shirt you're gonna donate. They only have to accept it. So we gave them back this dignity, and we listened to them, and we gave them attention. We gave them access to have fun again. And this was the important part of the event. So after the first year, we realized that this was the main part of the project. And we realized that everybody that touched this action, that were in contact with this action, they became different people. They started to see again the homeless people in our city, the invisible people. And it was so beautiful and so nice. And then we realized that we could do so much more. We could do so many different projects. And we started with a branch of sustainability, because we realized that's a very big connection between sustainability and homeless people here in Brazil, especially. I don't know in other places, but here we have a minister of the environment that he commits crimes against the environment. And we count on the homeless people to actually help us give the right destination for waste. So we have the homeless people picking up paper, for instance, or cans or glass, and they take it to the place where it's going to be recycled. So they're a huge part of sustainability, and we started to make these connections, and we have so many partnerships nowadays, and we can touch so many more people. It's amazing. It's a very nice work. And I could talk for many, many minutes about this, but I will give the floor to Henrique.
Thank you, Flavia. I'm sure you look passionate. But yeah, let's hear a little bit more. Henrique, do you want to share with us, please?
Okay, so just following up what Flávia was saying. So my name is Henrique. I'm also part of Dente-de-Leão. And well, just as a contrasting point to what Andrew was saying, I want to outline the profile of homeless people in Brazil, but more specifically in Brasilia, which is the city we are in. As you probably know, Brazil is a continental country, just like Canada, and we have many differences between cities. So the profile for homelessness in here is really different from other parts of Brazil. But mostly what we can say is that we have males in the streets. So during our actions, what we observe, for example, when we are collecting clothes for them for the street store, it's the clothes that we most need, male clothes. So masculine clothes, not masculine, sorry, male. That was bad English, sorry. Male clothes, and so the population in the streets is mostly composed by males. Many of them are single or alone, but we also do have many families in the streets, and females, single females as well. So women, men, and families. And recently, being more specific about the government. So there have been some measurements in taking care of homeless people since the beginning of the pandemics. But this effect hasn't been really observable from the people who are watching it. I mean, not in a positive aspect, but there have been some actions that are being held in Brasilia to try to minimize, if I could put it this way, the condition of the person who's living in the streets. Combined with that, which is not it's not a perfect world. We have also we've been seeing a lot of evictions as well, just like what's happening in Canada as well. So Andrew mentioned evictions. That's been happening here quite frequently. And yeah, so the causes for people to be in the streets here in Brasilia are various, just like many reasons for people to be in the streets. There's like breakups, which surprisingly it's very common, especially for men. There's just a result of poverty, so a result of migration from other parts of Brazil to the center, where Brasilia is, and Brasilia is the capital. So, and that causing, leading people to be on the streets without a real house to go to. So, as we were saying, these people are invisible in a certain way. And the thing is, in Brazil, there are many other groups doing work with the people that are in homeless condition. And of course, during the pandemics, it's been a little bit harder to work with these people, because there's always the chance, the risk of contamination. So it's really hard to provide some things that were easier to do before the pandemics was here, but it's still happening. And that's it pretty much. So our time is almost finishing. So let's go to the next part. So let's go to free conversation. So
thank you, Henrique, for sharing. And I guess it's interesting to hear you because probably all countries have homeless somehow, but we have different weathers and different cultures and different, how can I say, housing also. Like some cultures, you just leave very early your house because it's not interesting to stay with your family. In other cultures, you just stay with your family for many, many years. So I think depending on where we go in the world, we'll have always different things to discuss, and we could go on, as I said before, forever. And if we had other speakers from other countries, we will also learn other things. But I guess it's very interesting to hear how, again, how homelessness is very complex and very connected to other questions. And now we were talking about racism, and we also have the politic aspects, and Andrew said something very interesting about the George Floyd impact on Canada, and in Brazil we have a different political context, and also, well, gender and age maybe. And one interesting thing I would like to hear from you is about the harm reduction politics, because I think that's something very interesting and that is very different from in those countries we are talking about. And Andrew said you are more focused on this harm reduction, and also does the community support your work with homelessness? Do you have the support of neighborhoods, or how does it work for you?
So in terms of the success, I will say, we're still, because of our colonial relationship with the United States, we're still locked into a war on drugs and a certain criminalization of drug use. So what we're seeing is at the city level, there are enough forces that have kind of been able to mobilize around a harm reduction approach to start to kind of chip away at that. But of course, we're not criminalizing people, imprisoning people at the rate, anywhere near the rate as the United States. But when it comes to policing and criminalization, it's not like we've won or anything like that. It's really difficult even to get harm reduction sites where people can use openly funded. And there's a struggle in Vancouver. The model for the entire country keeps getting shut down. There has to be all kinds of public outcry to keep it going. But there's a lot of support. There's a lot of public support, especially in cities, because cities have seen the most drug use and have seen the most impacts of the drug war failing, and a lot of, especially not just with George Floyd, but more long-term, there's been really good struggles of racialized and working class communities to speak about how the war on drugs impacts them, to start influencing that city level. Again, the federal level, it doesn't matter. It's not about policy. It's not about, learning more about the problem. It's very much a colonial context of being complicit in the war on drugs. In terms of your other question about support for homelessness, it really depends. So depending on the class consciousness of a certain neighborhood, it'll really vary from neighborhood to neighborhood in terms of the resistance you'll get. There's a lot of hostility in any neighborhood, but in certain neighborhoods, when we show up, we can really count on some support and count on advocates to understand, there's a housing crisis, we need shelters, we need this, we need that. And there's been a lot of good outreach too, to kind of give communities a sense of what to do in situations of de-escalation so that people can also feel comfortable navigating situations that they might not have encountered before. In other neighborhoods, it's totally different. It's very hostile. It'll get, the idea of putting a shelter in a certain neighborhood, it'll get stopped before it even can start, basically. So it's very spotty. It's definitely improving. There's really a growing sense of, because the homelessness crisis is escalating so exponentially over the last 5 years, and the numbers of homeless and also just housing precarity in the city is just exploding. That's starting to change and starting to chip away. But I don't want to give anybody the impression that somehow we're just on a curve in terms of acceptance.
Very interesting. We have a question from the audience. I'll just read to you. Oh, of course. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
You were saying about these war on drugs and racism and how they're connected, and harm reduction and all of these. And in Brazil, this is so crazy that the law is basically, if you have weed and you are Black, you go to jail. If you have weed and you are white, you don't. Because the judge or the police officer, they decide if the quantity of weed is enough to make you go to jail, or if you're just a user. This is crazy because there's not a number in the law. The person decides. So if you're in a bad neighborhood, if you're Black, if you're poor, they're gonna see 1G and they're gonna say, yeah, you're a drug dealer, go to jail. And these numbers are recent. It's from 2019. 56% of people in jail, they did not have a hearing, like they were not supposed to be in jail, They didn't have a sentence for them. They were temporarily in jail because of this, because there's no proof. They're not drug dealers. They're just in jail because they were smoking in a bad neighborhood, or because they're Black, or this kind of things. It's crazy. It's very racist. It's horrible.
Yeah, just to tack onto that, very quickly, there's just been so much good research in a North American context about the ways in which different drugs are insanely racialized. So crack use versus cocaine use, the way it's policed, the way that, you can expect, if you're white, carrying, all of those things. There's just been an explosion of research around it. And what's different now, I think, especially after George Floyd, is that that's been able to link to now a politics of anti-policing, or at least getting at that root issue of policing and how it's racist.
Thank you. That's very interesting. That could be a conversation by itself. Yeah. We are sadly coming to an end already. It's so fast, but we have a question from the audience. Maybe if one of you would be interested in answering. Someone is asking if, in your experience, would you say that climate change comes into consideration when developing strategies to reduce homelessness? And I'll extend also this question, maybe saying, to link with the introduction, if you, in your works before, did you ever thought about climate change when dealing with homelessness before? And how, well, if you want to wrap up very quickly about that. I don't know which of you feels comfortable to answer. Just go ahead.
I just wanted to maybe say that in Brazil, I would say climate change is not as visible as it is in Canada due to the environment, the climate being less harsh here. So I wouldn't say that's something that they already consider when developing strategies to reduce homelessness. Maybe in Canada that could be more visible.
Yeah, and besides that, I think each year it gets colder in Brasilia, but our cold weather is like 16 degrees Celsius. It's not that cold. So, for instance, the housing first is not an so interesting program here because people here are not interested to be inside a house because they don't need to be. Usually it's very hot on the street, so they prefer to be on the street where they have the liberty to use drugs, they have their freedom, they can do whatever they want. So I think it's starting to make a difference because it's starting to get colder, like in São Paulo, for instance. Sometimes no. For the last 2 or 3 years, people have died of the cold weather, but only in the past few years. Before that, it didn't happen. So I think it might change a little bit the policies.
And very quickly, I know we're over time. In terms of Toronto, what I sense is that for the housing sector here, trying to think about environmental change or climate change, it typically takes the kind of slant of environmental sustainability of buildings and that kind of thing, like building efficiency and whatever. Canada tends to be very, I want to say smug about its approach to refugees and accepting, climate refugees and having high quotas and all that kind of thing. So there's not a good link that way in terms of understanding the responsibilities of rich Western countries accepting more people and thinking in terms of a global responsibility for the climate refugee crisis. But in terms, I will say at the same time, that's like the official housing sector. In terms of the activist scene here, it's extremely intersectional. So if you're talking about homelessness issues, you're talking about decolonization, and you're talking about capitalism, and you're talking about ways in which homelessness is a result of capitalist approaches to space and capitalist approaches to, the domination of cities and a colonial relationship to resources. So in an activist space in terms of housing, it's not a stretch at all to try to start bringing in environmental concerns, a lot of times through that decolonizing anti-racist lens. Like that seems to be a way that a lot of people are going, but it's a very intersectional set of struggles in Toronto, activist spaces.
Awesome. So thank you all for sharing. I think even though we can't go very deep in this content now, with the time we have, we just said lots of important things, and I'm sure the participants will keep this in mind and keep thinking about it for the next days and hopefully for the next years of their lives. In the end, what we have seen as an organizing committee is that climate change goes everywhere, and depending on how you look at the questions, we have many answers. So in each country and for each individual, we can find solutions that are easier for us to follow as communities. And yeah, we are very happy. Thank you so much, Andrew, Flavia, Henrique, for being here. We are very proud of the event. Now we also have one last activity if participants want to join, and yourselves. We have a talk from Amanda Bernal. She will talk about individuals balancing the global health. It's a very interesting talk. And if you have any further questions to the speakers, I posted the links to their works and accounts, so feel free to connect.